everybody, Hooded Cobra Commander 788 here. It's time for another vintage G.I. Joe toy review, and this time I am redoing a review that I've done before. I do that every once in a while when I feel like the review needs to be redone, when I think I can do a better job. So this time we're going to take another look at the twins, the Crimson Guard commanders Tomax and Zamot. What? No. No. No, we are not doing this. We are not doing twins to review twins. That is lazy. That is not creative. We can do better than that. In fact, who's we? I can do better than that. There's no we. Get out. Get out. Get out. Get out. How you like that, huh? How you like that? Be gone! To be really creative, you have to do more than just the obvious, and that's going to be a theme with this review. So without further ado, HCC788 presents Tomax and Zamot. This is Tomax and Zamot, the Crimson Guard commanders. They were first introduced in 1985. They were also available in 1986. They were discontinued for the year 1987. They were available briefly as a mail-away offer in 1990. They were sold as a two-pack. They were sold together, not as separate carded figures, and that was kind of unusual for the time. Before then, there were a few other multi-pack figures. Some of the 1982 figures were available in three-packs exclusively to Sears. Later in 1986, the Special Missions Brazil set was a 5-pack of figures, and in 1987, Cobra Law and Sergeant Slaughter's Renegades were sold as 3-packs. More multi-figure packs were available later in the line, but in 1985 it was less common. I don't have the packaging for Tomax and Zamot, but I do have this card here, published by 3D Joes, which shows the packaging for Tomax and Zamot. You can see how they were packaged here. They were on this very large card with these sides and a bottom to it, and the sides of the cards even had mirrors to reflect, no pun intended, the mirror nature of the twins. Tomax and Zamot are the Crimson Guard commanders, and this is a reference to the 1985 Cobra Elite Trooper, the Crimson Guardsman, sometimes known as CGs. Tomax and Zamot's link to the Crimson Guard is somewhat tenuous. They did appear sometimes with the Crimson Guard in G.I. Joe media, and some aspects of Tomax and Zamot's file card do reflect some parts of the Crimson Guard's mission. But the Crimson Guard concept itself is a little muddled. Are they elite troopers? Are they spies? They're kind of both. In 1991, the Crimson Guard Immortal was introduced, and this is not exactly a second version of the Crimson Guard. This is a new kind of trooper, and I like the concept of the Crimson Guard Immortal if he's seen as a Crimson Guard officer or field commander, the elite of the elite, if you will. I don't really need Tomax and Zamot as the commanders of the Crimson Guard. For that role, I think the Crimson Guard should be commanded by the commander of all things Cobra, Cobra Commander. But I do think Tomax and Zamot have a very important role within Cobra, besides just being the Crimson Guard commanders, and I will get to that later in this video. Let's take a look at Tomax and Zamot's accessories, and they both came with the same very large pistol, so I'm just going to take a look at one of them. The packaging just refers to this as a pistol, but it's a very large pistol, like a comically oversized pistol. This is not based on any real-world weapon that I'm aware of, and honestly, this doesn't really look like a G.I. Joe accessory. This really looks more like a Star Wars accessory. Their other accessory is the Skyhook, which has a couple handles on it, and those handles are kind of thick, and I get very nervous putting it in the hand of the figure. I worry about breaking the thumbs of the figure. This Skyhook is a solid plastic pulley with a loop and minimal detail, and it has a very long black string. If you thread the black string through the loop, you can use this Skyhook as a zip line, and I'll show you how that works. Just put one end of the string at a higher elevation than the other and have the action figure hold onto the handle, and he can zip down the line. This Skyhook seems like an acrobatic tool, something a circus performer might use, and that does reflect how the twins were sometimes portrayed in G.I. Joe media. Let's take a look at the articulation for Tomax and Zamot, and they had the same articulation, so let's just look at Tomax. That'll be fine. They had the standard articulation for 1985 G.I. Joe action figures. That means they could turn their heads from left to right. They could also look up and down. Their neck was on a ball joint. They could move their arm up at the shoulder about so far and swivel at the shoulder all the way around. They had a hinge at the elbow. They could move at the elbow about 90 degrees. They had a swivel at the biceps, so they could swivel their arm all all the way around. The figure was held together with a rubber O-ring that looped around the inside. That allowed him to move at the torso a bit. He could move his legs apart at the hip about so far. They could move his leg at the hip about 90 degrees, and he could bend at the knee about 90 degrees. Let's take a look at the sculpt, design, and color of Tomax and Zamot, and although they look alike, they are not alike. In fact, as far as I can tell, they share only one part between them. On their heads, they have a sly expression, dark brown hair that is very neatly and I'd say precisely combed. I think this looks like Jimmy Johnson hair. Although they have the same expression, these head sculpts are unique. Their hair is parted on opposite sides of the head. Additionally, Xamot has a scar on his left cheek that Tomax does not have, so that's one way you can tell them apart. There is a variant of this scar on Xamot's face. There is the light scar variant that has the scar painted with a very light pink paint, and then there is a dark scar variant with darker colored paint. I only have the light scar version. That kind of variant isn't really interesting to me. That's not the kind of variant that I would go after. Both Tomax and Zamot are wearing a blue shirt with a silver cobra sigil on it. Now this silver paint does tend to wear off very easy, so you're very lucky if you find a Tomax or a Xamot that has the cobra symbol still intact. It's the same problem that all of these silver cobra symbols had. They each have a red sash that connects to opposite shoulders, and then they have this armor, this sort of like an armored collar almost, but only on one side and again on opposite shoulders. Those details are also reflected on the back of the figure. These armored collars look to me kind of like parts of jousting armor. Not that I'm an expert on jousting or armor, but I have seen some suits of armor meant for jousting that have collars like this. I think to deflect the blows of the enemy's lance. On their arms they have shoulder armor, again on opposite shoulders. Their arms are otherwise bare with some sculpted muscular detail. They both have black gloves, and they also both have electronic devices on one wrist, again on opposite wrists, for Tomax on the left wrist and for Xamot on the right wrist. Their waist pieces are blue with some red details, a cod piece, a silver belt, and these again almost look like they could be shared parts, but they are not, because they on the sides have sculpted and painted details that go down to their leg holsters, and those are on opposite sides. Then we have those pistol holsters on the legs with these red sculpted ridges and black pistols, normal sized pistols, and of course they are on opposite legs, and this may be implying that Xamot is left-handed. No pistol on the opposite leg, just blue, and then we have these remarkably sculpted and painted cobra head details on the thighs. These sculpted cobra heads I think are supposed to be a continuation of the boots, and these boots are amazing. These silver boots, and they have these wicked knee pads. These boots look like they could be shared parts, but only one of them is. They each have a black knife sculpted on one boot, and they're sculpted on the opposite side, so these cannot be shared parts. But the other boot is plain, and that appears to be the only part that is shared between them. They just put this plain boot on the opposite leg on each figure. Let's take a look at Tomax and Zamot's file card, and they shared a file card, and to the best of my memory, they're the only set of figures that shared a file card. Usually, even if figures were similar, they would still have individual file cards. It has their faction as Cobra, and it has a split portrait of Tomax and Zamot, with Tomax on the top and Xamot with his scar on the bottom. They are the Crimson Guard commanders, codenames Tomax and Zamot. Their file names are classified, and their specialties include infiltration, espionage, sabotage, propaganda, and corporate law. Here we have a form of law shown as the equivalent of these different nefarious activities, and that unfortunately is a theme that kind of ran through 80s G.I. Joe, and it is not one that I agree with. Their place of birth is just listed as island in the Mediterranean, and that's very non-specific, but I think this may be referring to Corsica. Corsica is the island on which Napoleon was born in 1769, and there are a couple other French connections in this file card. This top section says, spell out the name Tomax in capitals and hold it up to a mirror. It reads Xamot. The same holds true for the actual brothers, and that is very gimmicky. Each is the mirror image of the other except for a scar on Xamot's face. Both twins served with the Foreign Legion Paras in Algeria before the Officers' Putsch. The Foreign Legion Paras is a reference to the French Foreign Legion, a branch of the French army that is open to foreign nationals. The French Foreign Legion is also open to French citizens, so I think this maybe kind of supports the idea that Tomax and Zamot are from Corsica. This line here about the Officers' Putsch in Algeria is a reference to the Algiers Putsch of 1961, in which 4 French generals attempted to overthrow the French President Charles de Gaulle. They were motivated by the French government's secret negotiations with the National Liberation Front during the Algerian War. For a dramatic account of the Algerian War, look at the 1966 film The Battle of Algiers. It depicts terrorism, torture, counterinsurgency, and it has some lessons that relate to issues faced by the United States and its allies in the global war on terror. They honed their mercenary skills in the bush wars of Africa and South America. They were too smart to be soldiers forever, went to Zurich and became bankers. This line here about going to Zurich to become bankers is possibly a reference to the so-called Gnomes of Zurich, which was a nickname given to certain Swiss bankers who were known for their secretive and speculative practices. Setting aside the name gimmick, this file card has some remarkable historical references. The Officers' Putsch is not something that most 9 or 10-year-old kids are going to know about, yet there it is, and it's been there for 30 years in this file card, waiting for us to discover it as adults. And it's so efficiently written. A single line tells us so much about Tomax and Zamot, but what it tells us is not obvious. You have to dig a little deeper to understand what it means. This is why I love G.I. Joe. This is why it was better than other toy lines. They respected their audience enough to put this on the toy packaging, and they just had faith that we would get it. Maybe not right away, but eventually. This bottom section says, they quickly found the ins and outs of international finance to be too haphazard for their tastes. They preferred a situation they could control. Cobra was willing to give them access to that control. Now they command legions, but their legions wear 3-piece suits and fight their battles in executive boardrooms. These then are the most fearsome of the Cobra adversaries. They don't fight with steel and claw, backed with muscle and honest sweat. They chase you with paper, wound you with your own laws, and kill you with the money you loaned them. I really don't like this moral dichotomy where if you fight with steel and claw, then somehow you're honest, but if you fight with paper, then of course you're deceptive and duplicitous. But I thought one of the purposes of civilization was to enable people to resolve conflicts peacefully rather than through violence, but of course G.I. Joe prefers the violent option. Where it says their legions wear 3-piece suits, that's a reference to part of the Crimson Guard's mission, where some Crimson Guardsmen got plastic surgery to look alike, and they were to infiltrate the halls of finance and power within the United States as kind of a fifth column to undermine the establishment. Tomax and Zamot did make a good number of appearances in G.I. Joe media, where they were not necessarily the most important characters, but they were fairly important. In the G.I. Joe cartoon, they first appeared in Pyramid of Darkness Part 1. In the cartoon, they sometimes spoke in unison, they sometimes finished each other's sentences, and they could also feel each other's pain. So that implied a psychic connection between the two.
Now that the Joes are preoccupied,
we are free to position our control cube.
Without interference.
Ah! Hey, check that out. Each twin feels what happens to the other.
In the G.I. Joe comic book, they first appeared in issue number 37, which also introduced some other important characters like Flint and Footloose. In that issue, their psychic connection was even more emphasized, where they could literally read each other's thoughts and feel each other's pain. Tomax and Zamot were sometimes depicted wearing suits, which I think better fits their role as bankers. Then there's this weird circus connection. The figures came with an acrobat's device, and in the comic book they were introduced introduced in a circus. Their costumes, you could even say, were inspired by circus acrobats. In the cartoon, they were sometimes shown doing random, strange acrobatics. Why? What does this have to do with their background? I think they just had too many ideas for Tomax and Zamot. I mean, they are bankers, they're mercenaries, they are circus acrobats. I think the creators just couldn't choose between all of these ideas, so they just used all of them. I think the idea of Tomax and Zamot as bankers and financiers of Cobra is a brilliant idea, and it really adds to the realistic structure of Cobra as a criminal organization. Within Cobra, you have Cobra Commander at the top, and he is able to provide an endless supply of brainwashed soldiers. You have Destro, who provides the weaponry, and you have Tomax and Zamot, who provide the money to buy the weapons from Destro. Each of these components would be necessary for an organization like Cobra to work. Taking a look at Tomax and Zamot overall, these were clearly meant to be deluxe action figures. They were sold as a 2-pack, they have a lot of silver paint, and standing alone, they are fine figures. The colors are very striking. I kind of like the way the colors work together. It's a good color scheme. It is in no way military accurate, but as I usually say, the bad guys can get away with that more than the good guys can. And the figures are undeniably well designed in terms of balance and contrast. But the fact that they're twins seems like such a gimmick. In fact, the Hasbro designer, Ron Rudat, recalls designing one figure, and as he recollects it, it might have been a decision of marketing to make it two. And as far as twins go, these guys embody every twin cliche there is. A friend of mine from Britain, who is a very talented comedian, has a twin brother, and we had a conversation about some of the bizarre things people say when they find out that you have a twin. Things like, do you feel each other's pain? And do you know what the other is thinking? In other words, exactly how Tomax and Zamot are portrayed. They're just one big twin joke, and that is creatively lazy. But if they're gonna be twins, this is how I would have done it. Instead of this feeling each other's pain and reading each other's thoughts BS, what if they hated each other? They each have equal control over their company, so they're forced to work together despite the fact they despise each other. Well, that idea isn't all that creative either. It really just takes the twin cliche and flips it upside down. But that idea does open the opportunity for conflict. Conflict! And conflict drives drama. One of the reasons Cobra is so great is because of the conflict. There's the obvious conflict between G.I. Joe and Cobra, but there's also a lot of conflict within Cobra. Individuals are vying for power and trying to assassinate each other, and there could have also been some conflict between Tomax and Zamot. As I imagine it, during the Cobra Civil War, Tomax and Zamot probably would have chosen separate sides. But if you get past the twin gimmick and all that goes with it, there are a lot of good things going on with these figures. I mean, all the historical references in the file card, and the fact that they fulfill an important function for an organization like Cobra, a function that a lot of toy companies might not have thought of. I do like these figures. I can't put them in the top tier because I do have a few little problems with the cliches and the muddled background, but despite that, the figures do have their charm. That was my review of the Crimson Guard Commanders Tomax and Zamot. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, make sure you give this video a thumbs up on YouTube, subscribe on YouTube, like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. That's what keeps this channel going, and share this video to help this channel grow. Thanks for watching, my friends, and until next time, remember, only G.I. Joe is G.I. Joe.
Tomax, watch out!
It's the Joes! Strike! Xamot, activate the control cube before it's too late.
Right!
I'll handle this, buffoon.
Hey, check that out. Each twin feels what happens to the other.
You may have one of us, but you have lost!
What's happening?
He's